Tonight, the number of patients is growing and the virus is mysterious, potentially deadly. Nearly 30,000 people could now be at risk. ABC's David Wright is tracking it all for us.
In one of the most beautiful places on Earth, a deadly disease is lurking. Yosemite Park rangers are warning every visitor about the outbreak of hantavirus, spread by rodents.
Actually, I had a mouse run across my head. It definitely scared me pretty good.
Already 8 people are known to have contracted the illness. As of today, 3 have died in California, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And there may be more cases as far away as France.
This outbreak appears to be unusual in terms of the number of people affected and certainly the number of deaths we've seen.
The outbreak was first traced to the popular Curry Village campsite, where rodents had burrowed into the insulation of tents. Officials now believe a second campsite in Tuolumne Meadows was also infected. Last week, warnings like these went out to 10,000 people who visited Curry Village since June. Overnight, notices went out to an additional 19,000 Tuolumne visitors, 29,000 recent park visitors in all.
There has been more concern, or more public concern, about hantavirus, given that we've had some cases of infection from patients who have been traveling recently in Yosemite Valley. In particular, these cases were thought to come from exposure to deer mice while they were staying at Curry Village, which is at the floor at the base of the Yosemite Valley. Hantavirus overall is a very, very rare infection spread by exposure to the urine or droppings of deer mice. And deer mice are wild mice that typically exist in rural areas or at higher elevations. In California, they're commonly found in the eastern Sierras. And whereas the hantavirus may infect the deer mice do not get sick from the hantavirus. Humans that initially get infected from hantavirus, the incubation period for the disease is about 1 to 5 weeks. Typically, they begin with very vague flu-like symptoms. This includes fever, fatigue, muscle aches and pains, and sometimes abdominal pain. Then the disease can progress, meaning that they'll then develop cough and shortness of breath, and eventually, with hantavirus infection, it develops into a life-threatening pneumonia. The disease is very severe, and about 38% of patients who get the disease will eventually die from the illness. Humans are not reservoir for hantavirus infection. They can get infected by exposure to deer mice, but they're unable to pass. They do not pass the disease from human to human. There have been no documented cases of human-to-human transmission from hantavirus infection. Because the most common route of transmission for hantavirus appears to be inhalation or direct inhalation of contaminated dust from contaminated urine and other secretions of the rodent, there are some measures that can be taken to prevent infection. Probably the most important general measure is to avoid contact with wild rodents, and this would involve carefully cleaning cabins in the proper way, and cleaning cabins to prevent rodents from making the living areas inhospitable to rodents. Another thing that can be done would be to keep basically all food kind of carefully packaged or wrapped away where it's inaccessible to rodents, as well as potentially taking steps to avoid inhaling or staying away from regions where you might be able to inhale contaminated dust from rodents. Now, because there have been no documented cases of human-to-human transmission, and because it's been thought that hantavirus is not contagious and cannot be spread from person to person, the cases have almost exclusively, the outbreaks have been very, very isolated. Therefore, I think that the probability that there will be a large-scale, wide-scale outbreak is quite remote. If you're worried about having been potentially exposed to hantavirus, if you've been camping recently, if potentially you've been in musty cabins or campsites or other areas where you may have been exposed to the urine or droppings of rodents or excretions of rodents, or you may have inhaled particles, it's very, very important that if you develop symptoms that you seek medical attention immediately. And this is because it's been shown that the earlier you get medical care, the better the outcomes from the disease, and the more likely it is that you'll be able to survive this very dangerous illness.